Hello again. Welcome to the Humble Togs Podcast for photographers who aren't dicks to each other, basically. Humble Togs Club is my community of photographers who aren't jerks to each other. There's so much online crap these days, and keyboard warriors are out there trying to really do their best to bring everyone down and throw insults at people. That's exactly why I started Humble Togs Club. It's a community for people to support each other in photography and throw ideas around as opposed to accusations or blame or all the usual crap you might see out there on social media. Each episode of the podcast, I speak to one member of the club. This episode, I have the very great privilege of speaking with Julian Coleman, who is a longtime videographer in the UK, and he's recently moved to stills photography and has been finding a lot of work with mitzvahs, that is bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. If you're not familiar with the Jewish mitzvahs, there is bar mitzvahs, which are for the young boys who are coming of age, and the bat mitzvahs, which are for the young ladies who are coming of age as well. So we're going to talk all about that and talk about the photography side of doing a mitzvah. If you've done a Jewish wedding or if you've been to a Jewish wedding, it has a similar style of really vigorous celebration. Those guys really know how to party. And if you ever get stuck as a photographer in the middle of some of the dancing that goes on in a Jewish wedding or a mitzvah, you'll know you're alive. So yeah, in this episode, just like most of the episodes, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the technical parts of photography, the settings and the gear and all of that stuff. This is largely a podcast to talk about the business of photography, how to do what we do, how to get booked, how to find clients, and what it's like in the world of building a business in photography out there. We also talk about fine art photography. Julian's an art collector personally, so we talk a bit about art itself and what it means to someone to be attracted to a piece of art. We talk about storytelling. You might have seen someone say to you, oh, what's the story in this image? And I want to peel that back and talk about, well, what do they mean by that? What does it mean to have a story in an image? A lot of people are confused by that critique of what's the story of this image. So we deep dive into that on this episode. Julian's a fairly new member, and so we're also getting to know each other as well. So without further ado, here's Julian. And if you are interested in photographing mitzvahs, this one's definitely worth a listen. Here's Julian. Hi, Julian. How are you?
Kurt, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great. Thanks for joining me today. It's 8 p.m. over here. Whereabouts are you joining from?
In London, in the UK, where it is just gone 11 o'clock in the morning.
Lovely, lovely. I've just put my daughter to bed. She may or may not be asleep yet, but is likely to go to sleep hopefully in the next hour of our chat. How long have you been in the club for, mate?
So I joined 3 weeks ago, yeah.
We had our chat when you first came in, and I just remember you were really, really keen to jump on the podcast. So here we are, and thanks for jumping on.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So we don't know each other that well yet. We had a bit of a catch-up chat, but why don't you just start by telling myself and the listeners where you've come from in your photography journey, what you're up to, and everything about that.
I first got my own camera on my 10th birthday. So what's that, just over 45 years ago? There we go. I've given my age away. And I come from, my dad was and still is an avid amateur photographer at a very serious level. He comes from the old film days. His brother, my uncle, is actually the only member of our family that did any form of professional photography training. He went to college and he actually studied photography. And he's the one who ended up not doing photography after that. I think he did in his younger days a little bit, but nothing much of that. And also my late grandfather as well. I mean, everywhere they went, they just documented their trips. They documented family gatherings. And I think I just naturally followed suit. So that was there. But the seriousness of photography for me didn't really kick in until about maybe 25 years ago, when I discovered fine art photography, and I came across a phenomenal fine art landscape, cityscape photographer and also a teacher called Serge Romelli. And he used to put a lot of videos up on YouTube, and I watched his videos, and to me it just made sense. I already knew about photography, but everything he talked about, the way he goes about capturing landscapes, and then more importantly, the post-processing work that goes into it afterwards to create what's typically known as fine art photography.
What would you say is part of his style that you were attracted to in his post-processing?
I think he could make a dull scene look awesomely bright, beautiful, and tell a very, very powerful story. But I think it's also his teaching as well. He always talks about foreground, midground, backgrounds, which I do put that a lot into practice when I am photographing. It doesn't always come out that way, even today with stuff that I do now. But I just love the idea of you can take what is generically quite a boring picture, and in the whole post-processing side of it, just bring the whole thing to life, dodging and burning and highlighting certain areas. The whole post-production, I mean, I found with some of the works that I've done myself, it's not a 2-minute process that you sit in Lightroom and do what you do and then it's done. For me, I mean, some of my best works has taken me, a couple of months actually to finish to a point that I've actually been really happy with it and something that I'd be proud to show off and showcase.
Do you find that sometimes you do a bunch of stuff to something and then have to go away and come back to an image to kind of look at it with fresh eyes?
Always. It's that happens probably more often than it doesn't. Certainly when I'm doing my street, my city, my seascape and landscape work, I quite often put it into Lightroom and I'll start playing around and I just can't. Nothing comes out. I went to New York a couple of years ago. The idea was, even though I was photographing lots of stuff, I wanted to have 6 pieces of fine art that would depict that whole trip for me from different perspectives. And I had the pictures and it took me close to a year to actually figure out what they were going to look like, how I was going to transform them. But when that happened, I just tried something I'd never tried before. And I was like, wow, that actually worked. And so these 6 pieces had that same kind of tone, look, feel. And I always talk about powerful storytelling because it doesn't matter whether you're photographing weddings, whether you're photographing landscape or street, there has to be a storytelling element to it. Otherwise, what is it you're conveying there? So that was that situation. But I ended up with these 6 pieces, like completely different, but you knew that it made up that set from that trip.
Do you sell any of that work online for anyone particular, or is it just for yourself?
I was going to. When I used to post the pictures up, I always got messages from friends and anyone who saw any of the work. I was like, are you selling this? I was like, no, this is work for me to keep. Then someone turned around to me and said to me, no, you should be selling this stuff. Why don't you just do it as limited edition fine art pieces? So I started to build out a site and I never got around to completing it, which is very typical of me anyway. So they're still there. And I do plan one day to revisit that and sell those pieces as limited edition.
Great. I mean, it's a lot of work. There's a couple of members now who are in the club that I have interviewed and talked to about that world, but it's a whole different world from doing events and portraits like you and I. For me, it's a lot easier to go and do something where people are going to pay you to do that thing, whereas that world is, oh, well, I'm going to create all these photos and then put them up online and have people look at them and then want to buy them. Is a whole different way of thinking about how you connect with people and how you sell that kind of work at that kind of level. But
yeah, it is. It's a job in itself. And, whilst I've got paying clients on what I call my day job, I've got to service my clients and then my stuff will happen eventually.
Yeah. Let's go back to, you mentioned there about the storytelling aspect. I think for a lot of people, especially the new people starting in just photography in general, that sounds like a simple concept, storytelling, but how do we define that? How do we help people understand that who don't get what we're talking about there? I think for me, when you say storytelling, it's quite often people put photos up in the club and say, give me some feedback, and I'll look at them and ask, well, what is the subject here? What are we looking at and why is it interesting or important? And to me, somewhere in there is where the answer lies for me. How would you define what storytelling is in an image?
For me is when someone will look at any of my pictures and they will understand the context, they'll understand the emotions. I love trying to pull out emotions. They will feel when they look at any of my pictures that they were part of that celebration, that they were part of that event that took place.
If we're talking about the fine art stuff, like what is the storytelling behind, like as an example, a landscape or how do you define that?
So for me, a very different definition. And so my wife and I are into art. We like buying art pieces. We're quite eclectic in our little collection that we've got. But when we go to art galleries, it's amazing how, there's pieces that are hanging on the wall there that we look at and they just don't speak to us. They say absolutely nothing to what we like and our taste. And yet there's other pieces that jump off the wall and we're very similar in our taste in there. And I relate that in my fine art stuff. I relate it exactly the same way that, first of all, it's when you were talking about art, that's very personal and it's very emotive. It will drive the emotions. And for me, when it comes to the fine art side of my work, it's how that piece of work emotionally engages you in that scene, in that moment, in that event. I posted a picture on the club that I took about 5 o'clock in the morning when I was in Gran Canaria of a very well-known blowhole under the sea called El Befedero. I actually nearly got killed there, but that's a different story. I actually posted a video clip of me actually doing that in the club. And for me, that piece just spoke about the power of the sea, the power of water, the power of nature, but also contrasting that with the beauty of that whole sunrise and, just that seascape scenery. So for me, that is how I would depict that storytelling element.
Yeah. Do you think that idea when you're walking around an art gallery and you said like some pieces don't speak to you at all and some do you think that's different for everyone and your life experience gives you context that is spoken to by certain pieces? Or do you think some pieces are universally such good storytellers in one image that everyone would have a positive reaction to it? What do you think about that?
I think that the way you react to a piece of art, be it art or photography art or, anything in the creative world, I think that is a personal thing. It's definitely your own life, your background, everything you do, your interests, relationships, your upbringing. That drives all those emotions. And I would say that, you can have 10 people standing looking at one piece and you'll have 10 different reactions to that same one piece. And it's a very, very personal thing. I remember when I first got into art and we visited the first gallery and we were looking to buy our first piece. And I remember them saying to me, don't buy something because the artist is famous or the artist is this or the artist is that. Buy something because it drives the emotion inside you. And we've got pieces up in our house that some friends who come when they first saw it were like, don't know what that's all about. And we have other people who walk in and go, wow, that is absolutely outstanding piece of work. And yeah, I think it's just an individualistic thing. And I think photography is the same as well. Certainly some of the work, my professional side of my work is the same as well.
Yeah, I think there are some elements, like you say, about foreground, about placing the background. That's a big thing where a lot of photographers don't think about placing the background. The background is out there behind the subject and they don't necessarily think about placing it where they want it to be. When you get to that point where you're like, oh, I'm choosing and deciding what to include in the frame and where to frame it on purpose for all sorts of reasons, that can become part of what becomes storytelling in an image. But that foreground, 100%. Midground, background idea is a great one to grab hold of if you're, again, just starting in photography and trying to figure out those parts of it. To me, there's the settings and the aperture and the shutter and those basic things are the basics of photography, but it's what you hear people talk about a lot. And I tend to think it's kind of part of the least interesting part of photography, honestly. Like once you get those basics under your belt, that's just exposure.
Yeah.
But all these other things is what makes photography really cool and fun.
100%. And it just gives depth and dimension to any given image. And I'm not saying you can incorporate that in every single picture you take. A lot of the work that I do now, it's really difficult, although I try to, in some aspects of the work, to incorporate the foreground, midground, and background. But you can't always do that.
Yeah. Most of my stuff is headshot. So I'm just thinking, even through my own work, like it's been a long time since I've had a foreground element in a headshot. Because you just wouldn't. You'd have the person's head and then you want all the attention to go to the face. But, but certainly for weddings and for landscapes, that having some element of the foreground can really help you frame.
Definitely. That's right.
Can you hear my dog?
No.
I can hear. I think the microphone is isolated enough, but I can hear my dog scratching around somewhere. Tell us now about your experience as a professional photographer now and what you do in your, is that what you call your day job?
That's what I call my day job. That is my day job. So I'm going to roll back about 20 or so years ago. I've always been in some form of content creation, delivery, distribution, much more from a technology side of things, and it's much more from a commercial side of things. And I was always the frustrated creative. I decided about 20 years ago, maybe even longer actually, to leave the corporate world, as exciting as it was, and to go it alone. So I had this fascination in videography as much as I did in photography as well. But I decided to go down the videography route. I think if I'm being true to myself and I'm being honest, I was probably more scared of going professional in photography, because if you don't capture that moment there and then, you miss chances, particularly when you're doing weddings and mitzvahs and corporate party events and stuff like that. And I think that for me was always the fear of not getting that shot. Do
you think that's worse than video though? Because you do a lot of videos.
Yeah, but
easier than video, or
video, I found that you're rolling anyway. So, and when you've got a camera locked off, you've always got your safety shots, even if you weren't able to get in the action and stuff. But when you're photographing, you are literally, you've got that one chance to click the shutter and get that shot. And I think that for me was always the big fear. And I think the other element is I didn't want to lose my passion for what was my hobby and my interest. And I didn't want to lose that passion for it. So I chose the videography route. And actually that was awesome because whilst I was filming mitzvahs and I was filming weddings and I ended up doing some corporate stuff, I ended up back in the corporate world working in a very disruptive platform, doing crowdsourcing content creation for the big brands like Unilever and Procter & Gamble and such like. So an LA-based company, so LA became my second home for quite a big chunk of time. And it took me to wild places. But inevitably, I was always destined to be the photographer. So my wife is a events planner and producer, and she builds these awesome productions and stuff. And she turned around to me and said to me, look, you're an awesome photographer. I just don't know why you're not doing it professionally. And if it's for the fear of getting work, I can recommend you. I can put you out there in the mix of other photographers and all the rest of it. So I bit the bullet and I did it.
That's a big head
start. It's a help. It definitely helped. She would never recommend me in isolation, and I would never want her to recommend me in isolation because I think that would be very, very unfair and I think it'd be very wrong. But she put me out in the mix of, 4 or 5 photographers that she would recommend to her clients. And I also wanted to be chosen on my own merits as a photographer. So that's how it all started. So I started shooting Bar and Bat Mitzvahs, and then I built up the courage to then go and shoot weddings.
As a second? Were you shooting as a second at all, or you went straight into...
I have never shot as a second, and that's like really weird because I will watch others do what they do and I'll kind of learn very quickly. I just kind of know where you need to be, how you need to do things. And whilst it was massively, massively risky to not be a second and learn from somebody else, I think it's also been a really exciting journey. And my learning curve in photography of this side of the world has been like huge, massive. I look back 4 years ago and I compare what I was and how I am now, and it's like chalk and cheese. I'm a completely different type of photographer. I never used to use lights. I never directed people. And now I do everything. And I feel very confident doing all of this now.
You mentioned at the start of the episode that you've been shooting 25 years, but it's only been like the last 4 that you've been professional as a stills photographer, because you've done a bunch of video and other things as well, right?
Yeah. So photography's been there for 45 years. 25 years ago, thereabouts, is when it got really serious.
For videography or
Videography and photography, both.
Oh, both, yeah.
Videography professionally, stills much more in the creative fine art side. But it was only not even 4 years ago that I was being hired as a photographer to photograph events and photograph people and stuff. So,
I was just thinking back myself. I think I'm the same as far as wedding seconds. I don't think I ever shot. I'm really just having trouble remembering and thinking back. I think I was the same. I worked in a studio. I was seconding there. I was learning from someone else and then being trained by someone else, but I was doing my own shoots. And then when I started shooting weddings, I just started to shoot weddings. It was basically friends, right? Friends would ask, can you shoot my wedding? And I was like, yeah, let's give this a crack. So I would just start, and then I had seconds. But I think I'm the same. I don't think I ever went to work for someone as a wedding photographer. I think I tried, to be honest. I tried. And I was trying to get jobs as a second when I was getting started. But then I was like, screw it, I'll just do it myself.
I think there's a lot of merit in doing that. And I think it's very different. If I had come in knowing nothing about photography and I had no background, technically when it comes to cameras, I'm all over them. I know my way around cameras, the exposure triangle and what it's called now.
Well, that's just the buttons, all the buttons.
All the buttons and stuff, and I can go from one environment to another. I can go from indoors to outdoors, and, like literally I can change everything. I know where I'm going to with all my settings. And I definitely wasn't like that 4 years ago. So I've learned that.
Right.
But I think that having not been a second for anybody has forced me to learn it. I mean, I've done so many courses and in so many different genres, particularly weddings and personal brand photography, but that was much more of a business side. But from a creative side, I've done a lot of online courses on weddings. So I've got a much better idea of how to stage everything, how to position everybody, how to do all of the prep and everything. But I don't think, now that you've just asked the question, I don't think I could ever be a second photographer for anybody. I'd be really scared because I know what I do and I know how to do it and I know what I'm looking for. That being said, I have actually had a couple of my professional friends be second for me in certain things.
Yeah. And to be honest, I've been a second in like the last few years to a mate who's needed me. But it was fun because I was like, this is chill. This is chill AF. I don't have any responsibility really. I'm just going to hand over the memory cards at the end of the day. I don't have to process anything. It was like a chill gig. I was very, very happy to be a second in New York City for some people.
I'm not saying that if someone asked me to be a second for them that I wouldn't do it. I 100% would do it because, like you said, I can imagine it being, you've got no pressure. You're just there to shoot everything else that the main photographer is not able to get and a bit more. And I've seen some seconds who have actually managed to get the money shots. In one of my mentorship groups, our wedding photography mentor often takes some of us as seconds. I've not been able to do it because he's quite a distance from me, but one of the guys who's really new into the photography world of things, he actually got the money shots for our mentor, who is a multi-award winning photographer, and the second, who's very new to everything, he got the money shot of the day. So, it can be a lot of fun, and I'd never say no. Yeah,
totally. I think the best seconds, like when I had the studio and I had a couple other photographers working with me, we always shot the wedding together. I owned the studio and whatever, but it was very much a partnership, and it was never really like, I'll get the hero shots and you just get the secondary. It was always like, you go do that one, I'll do over here. It was collaborative. I think it's the best way to be. After a while, when you know the photographer well enough and you work together well enough, I think that's the goal for any duo on a wedding, is to work at that level.
I agree. I actually had an experience. It was only 4 weeks ago, and it was photography for a charity. And it's a charity that I shot for last year. And for whatever reason, and it wasn't the charity or the event organizers that wanted another photographer. It was someone on, I don't know, there was some politics behind it, and they had to use this photographer. I'm not going to mention any names. And this photographer is renowned. He's built himself up within the charities in my community as one of the main photographers. And he's an awesome photographer. I know him fairly well. We got on really well. He had an accident the day before the event took place, and I got a phone call from the event organizers asking if I was available the following night and if I would go and photograph as the second photographer to his second photographer. And I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And by the way, his photographer can't be there to do all the formal step and repeat shots. Can you get there to do all the step and repeat shots? Yeah, perfect. I'll do that. That's great. Anyway, so we get there, I do all the step and repeat shots. Then the photographer turns up, and he hadn't been briefed properly, and I'd been given this very loose thing. And it ended up me being the lead photographer on that. And I could see he was the second photographer because when the actual gala dinner side of things started, he was very much working at the rear of the room, whereas I was getting at the front where all the main action was. And so it's interesting watching a second photographer that you're working with, how they actually operate, because they go into this de facto second photographer mode.
Yeah, if he's used to being a second.
He's used to being a second, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm always, with respect to everybody that's in the room, sometimes it's quite tight to move around and you want to get to the front, you want to get the money shots, you don't want to disturb proceedings and stuff. But, I crawl along the ground, I get to where I need to get to the money shots. And then he said to me, he goes, do you think we can go down the front and get some more kind of close-ups? I was like, I've done it already. And then suddenly I've seen him now at the front there, and he's now taking the pictures. And, it was quite an amusing experience, and it was an interesting experience to do that. Yeah. You can definitely see how a second photographer goes into this de facto mode of, I'm not the main photographer, and I'll kind of work a certain way.
I think that's why that's bad, honestly, as a setup, because you want, I think, the photographers to be on even keel. So something goes wrong, the other one can jump straight in, and it's not this secondary sit back, you do from the back, I'll do from the front. I think that's, that's the problem with that style of partnership.
I totally agree with you. I think this was a bit of an unusual one as well, because he hadn't had a full briefing and I hadn't had a full briefing. And so we weren't working in tandem at times. And I think also at the end of the day, we have to deliver to the client, and we delivered to the clients.
Great. You said like the last 4 years have been a big turning point. Where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years, 10 years even?
That's a really good question. I started off 2025 with this whole new direction of going down the route of personal brand photography, and I was part of a really good mentorship group. But for some reason, for me, that didn't manifest into a huge amount of personal brand photography work. I've done some. You go to my website, and that's what my website screams a lot more of right now, but that's all going to change shortly, because I did start off last year with the mindset of, this is the direction I'm going in, and this is what's going to be my big thing, and this is what I'm going to become known for. But I feel that the gods have got completely different ideas for me. I still do a lot of mitzvahs. I still do weddings. I do a lot of corporate work. I did a behind the scenes shoot for a TV commercial a few weeks ago. I've done a mitzvah on Saturday night, and I did a charity event. This week I'm doing a charity gala. I'm doing some headshot. For me, it's just like every week is something different. What I'm looking forward to is the variety. I don't think I'm ever going to specialize in any one particular area. I know what I'm not going to do. You know, I'm not interested in maternity. I'm not interested in newborn. I have done some school portrait work and stuff, but, you know, it's not my passion. I've got to be really interested, really driven, passionate about what I do to be able to give it my all. So that being said, I just want to grow this business. I want to be the best photographer that I can possibly be. And whether it ends up taking me in one particular direction or I just keep it as this very generic, which I know some of my colleagues will scream at me for. Not
niche down.
Yeah, I've heard this so many times on podcasts and from mentors. You've got to niche down on being the photographer. And actually, I feel that I'm a much better photographer by not niching down, because I'm getting to use the camera in different environments. I'm engaging in different techniques and methodologies. If I'm doing studio work, I'm being much more technical about things with the elements of creativity, versus when I'm doing the corporate events or the mitzvahs or the weddings. You know, I'm much more of a candid documentary photographer. I think that's definitely who I am. But I just love this idea of being able to mix what I do. And I think that's where my skill as a photographer is developing and getting much better. And I think you can see that in my work as well. So yeah. The next 5 years is just continue doing what I'm doing, but just growing it from where I am.
Yeah, I think the thing about the niche thing, which people don't necessarily address, is the idea of niching down is purely a marketing decision. If you are struggling to market to an audience, be booked. Niching down is a great idea because it can help you just narrow your message to one crowd.
Yeah.
Now, you and even I, it sounds like you've got enough work and whatever, so you don't need to niche down when you are in work. I mean, I've probably niched down in some respect as far as actors' headshots, because that's what I generally am known for and have been known for a long time. But that doesn't mean I haven't done weddings of the actors and family shoots for the actors and all these other things. But you find your way to do other types of shoots all the time. I think niching down, it is important to make that clear that the reason you would niche down is if you're having trouble with marketing and you can't find an audience. That's the reason to niche down. You don't need to niche down to become a successful photographer. Like you said, it's more interesting doing a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I absolutely agree with you. And I think if anything, if I were to categorize myself in a niche, it's the candid documentary style photographer. I would say that is my niche. But that then crosses lots of different areas that I work in. So that's my niche, but it's across a number of different genres of the photography. But I don't subscribe to it personally. I mean, we all want more work. I've got capacity for a lot more work. I'm not yet fully booked out. Maybe that's kind of my goal for the next 5 years, is to increase my bookings so that I am 80% booked out. That'd be a great achievement.
I think it's nice for me, like if I can get to a point of not necessarily being booked out all the time. I mean, I tend to do things where I'll do like, you know, I've got a day of 4 shoots coming up in a couple of weeks. Actually, by the time this podcast will be out, I'll be done with that. But I'll do like intense 4 days of shooting and I'll book 40 people, 30 people in that time and do a lot all at once. I don't want to be fully booked so much as have enough work and enough money to then enjoy time with my family, really.
Right.
That's the goal, right? I think is as long as you've got enough work that you're comfortable and you can manage what you're doing. Because when I had the studio, I used to be like that and used to work all day and all night. And I mean, I do a lot of that now too. But but back then, I really had to like feed the beast and pay all the wages and the rent and all that stuff. I feel a bit more relaxed about that stuff now. Let's spend the last few minutes of the chat here talking about the bar mitzvahs and the bat mitzvahs, because I'm really interested in that stuff. I'm actually booked for one back in New York City from a family that I've been doing family photos for a little while. And
amazing.
Their son's come of age and they asked me to do that. And I've done a few before randomly, but it's coming onto my radar a little bit now. And I've been talking to photographers like yourself. And it's really another little hidden niche that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about. To me, you know, it's kind of like a wedding, right? In the style of what you do, because it's like a big day and everything. But yeah, talk to me about what you get out of that and what you enjoy in that world.
So first of all, that world is my cultural background, being Jewish. So that's my world anyway. But what I love about the mitzvah side of things, it is a big celebration. There's 2 elements to that celebration. You've got the religious side of things. So whilst we can't photograph on the Shabbat in synagogue, we can often photograph in the midweek. There's rehearsals, and also boys will get called up to the Torah reading. midweek. So we get to photograph that. We can photograph that with the family. So that's got the spiritual side of things. And capturing those moments, from my perspective, is really special. It is the coming of age in Judaism. It's just very poignant and a really important time, I feel, to be capturing for families. And it's the same for girls. When they reach 12, they have a Bat Mitzvah. Often their ceremonies on Friday night before the Shabbat starts. So we do get an opportunity to go in and photograph that. And they do a bit of a reading, and there's a celebration and stuff. And then we come to the fun part. We come to the party side of things. And
which a lot of chairs. There's always a lot of chairs.
Oh, there's lots of chairs. And we have in London, I'm sure it's the same everywhere else. It doesn't happen every time, but we have flag throwing. So there's a big Israeli flag, and sometimes the siblings and the parents are put on the flag, and they're thrown up off the flag, and it can get quite wild. And capturing those shots get really wild, but capturing those shots, when you get those money shots, they can look pretty spectacular. I think the best one I ever did was a year ago, and literally the boy got thrown so high up. They had a marquee, and he just looked like he was at the top of the marquee. It looked absolutely awesome.
Like a big wide angle will accentuate
well, it depends. I play around with it a little bit. I've kind of now taken to being a little bit further back, and I'll use my 24-70. Sometimes I'll use a 70-200 because I can get closer up from a distance, and I'm finding I'm getting better shots like that and much more dramatic shots, because I'll go and stand on the stage or ladders. So I'm above the head height of all the guests. So you can see that separation of when the person's been thrown off the flag. So they can be quite dramatic. Of course, you've got what I call the formal family pictures that we do, and the fun pictures that we do with the boys and the girls and their siblings, and we'll do all sorts of fun things. That's the stuff that was really new to me 4 years ago, that I genuinely struggled with. I struggled in the direction, I struggled in the posing, I struggled where to position people. A handful of courses and a bit of learning about how to pose people and position people has made a huge amount of difference. So now I feel very, very comfortable. It doesn't matter the heights, it doesn't matter the sizes of people. I feel very comfortable in how I'm moving people around and all the rest of it. Then comes the crazy Israeli dancing side of things, which can get really chaotic and really hectic because they dance really fast and they're in circles and they're spinning each other. It's a lot of fun, really crazy. Capturing those moments can be a little bit hairy as well.
You gotta watch the lenses. What's that 7200? You've knocked someone in the face.
Yeah, well, I kind of get rid of that at that point, and I go down to my 16-35, which is my go-to dance floor. I shoot very wide on that, but getting those shots can be quite hairy. And actually, for the camera to keep in focus on the subject can be a little bit challenging.
Yeah, so having that wide angle, you're just like, I want big, massive depth of field because I don't know what's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And also lighting conditions at times can be a little bit mad, so you've got to go with it. And I have had, going back to talking about seconds, I have had in a couple of mitzvahs, I've had seconds come and shoot for me. And on one occasion, it was the first time they had exposure to mitzvahs. So I briefed them, I explained to them, and I actually said, it's all on camera flash for these things, by and large, and she operates off camera flash. And it was, even if she's an awesome photographer, but knowledge and experience in this particular area makes a world of difference. And you really need to know what you're doing. You need to know where you are and where you need to be. But what I absolutely love about shooting mitzvahs is there's a lot of production that goes into the event itself. There's a lot of color, there's a lot of light, there's a lot of detail, there's so much going on. And I just love capturing that, and I love bringing it to life. And, I make my mitzvah pictures are very vivid, and they're very colorful, they're very powerful. By the way, I also do a lot of black and white, even in the mitzvah side, because I love black and white. Black and white, I think, is so much more powerful than color pictures are in so many different ways. It's just a combination of all those things that is what I love shooting mitzvahs for, apart from maybe losing a toe or two in all that crazy dancing. But no, it's genuinely a lot of fun. And when the clients get the pictures, they're just like, they love it. And it just brings back all the memories, and sometimes even elements that they totally forgot about or didn't even realize was taking place. And I've had that so many times said to me that they didn't even realize that had happened. And even though they were in the picture, they totally forgot about it because they're all caught up in the moment.
Yeah, and that's nice on weddings too, when you capture things that the bride and groom never see. The bride and groom
exactly
busy, and never get a moment to sit down and take it all in.
That's right. They're great. They're full of energy and a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. If there was a bit of advice you can give for anyone starting in mitzvahs, and look, I'd probably count myself, I've probably done 5 or so in my career mitzvahs, and I've done a Jewish wedding before. But if you can give some advice to anyone starting in mitzvahs, what advice would you give them?
I would go along and see what they look like at first, because it's not like photographing anything else in regard to this energy. There's just so much going around. And I would say, if you can, go as a second with someone, go and assist a photographer who really knows that market and knows it really, really well, and understand kind of what happens throughout the night. And there's different elements, different times, and you just got to be ready for it. You've got to be ready for all sorts. I did one in December, and there was 4 generations. There was the great grandma, the grandma, the mum, and the daughter. It was a bat mitzvah. And suddenly the great grandma started dancing with the great granddaughter. So had I have not been ready for that, I would have missed that. But then at the very end, she got hold of the microphone and she started saying a few words, and it's so amazingly powerful. But if you weren't ready for things like that, and all sorts of things can happen in these events, you miss those opportunities. So my advice is go along, assist, or be a second, and really understand how the journey of a mitzvah event rolls out. If you're going into the synagogue or temple, as they call them in America, understand what actually happens during the ceremonies and when you can photograph, when you can't photograph. Most synagogues you can't photograph on a Shabbat, but you can go in a weekday. There's rehearsals, there's other opportunities to photograph. And also just have an understanding of the cultural aspect of photographing a mitzvah, because you have such a wide range within Judaism. You have culturally from the what I would call the lesser religious, the more kind of reform and progressive side of the religion,
Jewish,
all the way Jewish, all the way up to the ultra religious. And there are obviously cultural sensitivities on that side. So if you're going to enter photographing the mitzvah market, which I absolutely advocate, there's always a mitzvah happening, not all year round, because there's certain parts of the year where we can't have any celebrations for a few weeks at a time. But understand the cultural aspects and you'll do really well. My last piece of advice on that actually is get involved. And I say this even as a wedding photographer, and I learned this from a mentor. Get involved with the guests, become one of the guests, and they will invite you in to photograph them, and they will be more than welcoming. You can't photograph these big celebrations, weddings included, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish, from the sidelines, because then you don't grab the moments and the atmosphere and such like. So my other suggestion, whatever kind of photography you're doing, is actually get involved and be part of the actual celebration. I dance around with guests, and we have a good laugh and a good giggle, and that way they'll invite you in and they won't shy away from the camera. And actually a lot of the time they don't even notice the camera either, so you get these really good, genuine, candid moments. And
that's great. It's lovely to hear your opinions and thoughts there, Julian. Thanks for joining us today,
Kurt.
and I'll see you around the club very soon.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. If this episode hit home, share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to be part of a photography community that actually supports you, come check out Humble Togs Club. You'll find the link in the show notes, or head to humbletogsclub.com. If you haven't already, make sure you're following the podcast and drop a quick rating. It really helps get this out to more photographers who need it. And I'll see you in the next episode or in the club. Stay humble and keep chasing awesome.